Okay. Hi, John. Thank you for joining us today, telling us about your flying career, flying the Vulcan, and what it was like. So we just want to know about your career and what it was like flying the Vulcan, and obviously QRA duties, etc. And obviously your young age, what you were flying the Vulcans at. So if you just tell us in your own time everything about it, and then whenever you want to stop for questions, we'll ask you questions. Over to you.
Hi. Thank you for coming along, everyone. My name's John Huggins. When I joined the Air Force, I was 17. I was 18 about a month after I joined. This evening, I've got with me one of my daughters, Tanya. She's over in Seattle. She's going to move the illustrations for us. And I should have my other daughter joining us as well. She's in Orlando, but she's out working on a church at the moment. What I want to do is take you back in time to what it was like when I joined. We've got so much today, forget what it is. So if you can take us back, Tanya, we're using the time
We're
machine.
going back. Yeah, we're now back. And so set the scene, Dad, of what it was like in the 1960s.
Well, first of all, we remember there was no internet, no mobile phones. There was lots of things today we take for granted. We just didn't have in those days. So you couldn't communicate very well. You didn't know where you were unless you could read a map. And if you wanted someone, you had to either go and see them or ring a neighbour to get them. You very rarely had a phone to yourself. It was usually a shared line. And so the world was a totally different place. The only thing we had that was good were miniskirts started in 1995. And it was about a year before they discovered they needed tights to go with them instead of stockings, if you think about that. And then we had, of course, in those days, people weren't quite so happy to have the bomb. Most of the people in the Labour Party at the moment that are in the government were actually in the ban the bomb movement. So they were trying to stop people having bombs anywhere in the world. In fact, there are parts of Britain like Derbyshire that are still nuclear free. They won't allow anybody with nuclear convoys or something like that to go through the county. It was the big thing was the main people that will influence you were the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and people like that. They all had long hair. We, of course, didn't. We were military, so we had short hair. So as soon as you went anywhere that was public, particularly if you were in something like Cambridge, when we were at Oakington, and there were lots of students about, they used to get very violent and talking about ban the bomb, they were going to ban most of the pilots as well. Anyway, I was brought up in Boston in Lincolnshire, and so of course my whole life I've had aeroplanes coming over and near me and around me. And when I was about 9, my mum took me to Cleethorpes, and I got a trip on the beach in an Oster. I think it was £5, which was about half her wages for the week. And then when I was 13 and a half, I joined the ATC, and I spent most of my weekends and time with them, eventually finishing up as a flight sergeant. I got a flying scholarship. So by the time I was 17, I couldn't drive a car, but I could fly an aeroplane. And it was quite amusing, really. I took my girlfriend with me for a flight at Skegness one weekend, and the police stopped me because they thought I was underage to be riding the scooter, let alone flying the aeroplane. But I went through the usual selection at Biggin Hill. One of the big things for me was I was walking down the road. I saw Douglas Bader coming the other way. You couldn't mistake him. He was shuffling along. So as I went past him, I saluted. I had my Air Cadet uniform on. I said, "Good morning, sir." And what I got back was, "I'm not fucking interested in the weather. Just your salute will do." So I thought, he's as cheerful as people say he is. But we went through selection. That probably told you about it in the past. What the problem they had in those days was that the humans had reached about the end of their ability to deal with the technology and the aircraft that were coming along. I mean, for example, if you took a modern airplane today that you've got like the Lightning, you just simply couldn't fly it manually. A computer has to do it for you. We didn't have any computers. So you had to have a mindset that could cope with both the technology and the rate it was coming at you. and it didn't have any respect for your education. So you could be a brilliantly educated kind of man from a college or a university, but you couldn't actually handle what was coming at you the way it was coming at you. So I think they worked it out. There's about 1,000 applicants for each person that finished up as a pilot. So it was quite today. I imagine it's different. They're looking for someone who can handle the computer rather than the aeroplane. Now, I think of the people I went with, I think there were about 30 of us or something on an intake. Only 2 of us finished up coming through it. And I joined the Air Force then on the 12th of January, 1965. To give you some idea of what it was like price-wise in those times, might surprise you. You could buy a house for about £3,000. You could buy it, but sugar and bread and things were quite high, even at today's pricing. There's some idea for you. I got a little thing from the post 1 week saying you to go to South Cerney on the 12th of January, and we gave you a rail warrant to do it. I'd never left home apart from the air cadet camps in my life. No idea what life was like outside Boston at all. So off I went. We got there and then we went through the training. It took about 4 months to turn you into an instant officer. You did remarkable stuff that would see you through the rest of your life, like sword drill, arms drill, bayonet fighting, and all sorts of things. But a lot of it was on leadership, which was, I don't know who was supposed to lead, but it wasn't geared towards the ordinary men in the Air Force. It was geared towards people of your same level. Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Phil? Did you want to ask something, Phil? No, it's all right. Sorry. Okay, Matt.
Yeah, any questions, just ask away.
No, he had his hand up, that was all. I think it's just right, so
I don't think anyone's
went
got
through
any yet.
South Cerney. I got recourse once because my maths were useless, and they still are. I've never understood maths in my entire life. I just think I can understand why you calculate some things. I can understand when they use practical, but when you talk about pure mathematics, it's completely above my head. I never stood with that. But we got through that, and I finished up as an acting pilot officer. I think you got a picture of me there, Tanya, with the pass out parade. No, that's you get
that one. Yeah.
That's at the end of the training. You can see
Yeah.
quite a student.
I'll have to flip through to get to the pass out parade. It's down at the bottom. Let's see. That's crew. There you go.
There we are. That's me passing out. I'm the little one in the middle. You can see we were good sizing in those days. You can see the Air Force still hasn't got above 303 rifles. We were carrying those. And the sword drill, the only time I ever used that was when I was commanding a TA unit on a parade in Wellingborough. That was about 20 years later. But I'd never been so fit as I was when I came out of there. Towards the end of the course, the big thing was to run around the airfield with a parachute on, carrying like a thorn from a gym between 2 of you, with medicine balls stuffed in between the sort of support at the bottom and the seat. And you'd stop about every 10 yards and throw the ball to each other, then set off again. And around an airfield, it's about 5 miles. When you got through that, that was it. We jumped off the back of trucks to do parachute rolls. We were thrown in the pool with a parachute over your head to show you how to get out of a parachute from that was falling on top of you. And then we fired most of the things that we'd ever fire, like a Sterling, 9mm, and things like that. I never saw one again when I was in the Air Force, apart from when I went out to the Far East. Certainly didn't have bayonets, but there we go. Right, so from there, they had to wait for the Church Fenton to go to my basic flying school, and they sent me to RAF Waddington, which was wonderful. It was just near where I lived, or only about 20 miles down the road, so I could go home and see people. Now, Waddington, look,
yeah.
when we were at Waddington, they were making the film Thunderball. You've probably seen that, and for years afterwards, people had asked me where the door was into the bomb bay. Of course, there wasn't one. But in order to get the shots of the aircraft taking off, they had a Mickey fin, and everybody left. Now, it was a bit different than the ones when I did them, but this is 1965. All the aircraft took off and went to the dispersals, and all the officers on the camp went with them to command the dispersals with a lot of the ground crew there. So I was left on the camp as the only other officer with Group Captain Brown, Cyclops Brown, who was the station commander. So I finished up doing all the duties like, orderly officer and things like that between us. And one of the things I got to do was to post the guards on the nuclear weapons dump at the end of the airfield. So if you go through Waddington, the airfield's on one side, and on the left, there's looks like a lot of bunkers. Well, each one of those had a bomb in it, and you had to post the guard. Now, something you never see as well is the guards on the nuclear one had war dogs. RAF war dogs are incredible. They're about the size of a small house, and their eyes absolutely glare at you. They're trained to go for you between your legs or your throat. They don't go for your arm, and they're trained to kill. So anybody who tried to get into the nuclear weapons dump were really foolish. The SAS tried it one night and then yelled for them to call the dogs back. It was like an area of two fences, and the dogs patrolled between them. So we do that. And then we had a Canberra came and landed on the airfield to block it. We had an attack by some brown people, and then eventually we had an air attack. So I was put in charge of one of the air raid shelters, which is outside the Airman's Mess, and that was the one where all the WAFs went. So I was going to spend my nuclear Armageddon with about 20 nice female ladies from the WRAF. Well, the sight of their eyes when they saw an 18-year-old young officer, you can imagine. I wanted to get out of there. But anyway, so when I finished at Waddington, I went to Church Fenton. Again, you went there too, I think, that. Remarkable place. It's very close to the brewery in South Yorkshire. And while we were there, we had the people from the Jordanian Air Force were doing their advanced flying on vampires. We were learning on the JP3. And at the time, it was straight through jet. You came straight off the street, straight into a jet aircraft, JP3. And the problem was that people were failing miserably. We were literally, people just couldn't keep up with it. The JP3, that's it there, is about the same performance as the later marks of Spitfires. And you can imagine getting straight off the street into one of those. These were easier to control and all the rest of it, but it just was too much. I think afterwards they then went back to basic training. We went on Chipmunks first, and then before we went on to the JP3. And it was expensive for people to fail too. If a Jordanian pilot failed his course, he was fined £100,000 by his government. So we must have been about the same. It was good teaching. Because I'd got my flying scholarship and I got a PPL, it was easier for me perhaps than the others. And I was lucky I had an instructor who was master pilot good. So they were people who had flown in the Second World War, and they were master pilots rather than officers. Now, we'd done a few trips, and he said, look, you do the aerobatics, we do everything. What I'm going to teach you to do is fly by instrument. That will teach you more than anyone else in this course. And I did hours with the hood on flying instruments. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. The final handling test you did was like a flame-out controlled descent through cloud with no engine on to land the aircraft. I got through that. I finished up third in the aerobatics prize, 7th overall, and out of the 33 of us that started, 17 of us passed out. I think we've got a picture of that. That's me when I finished. Always did like Spitfires. I think I needed a ladder to get in one. When I finished at Church Fenton, I went off to Gaydon to wait for my advanced flying. Now, at that time, they didn't tell you what you were going on to. I told them from the very beginning I wanted to fly Vulcans. I wasn't interested in anything else. But if you went down to Oakington, you normally went into transport, Shackletons, something like that. In order to fly the Vulcan, you had to go through the NAT course at Valley. Everyone up to that point had been through on NATs. Now, While I was at Waddington, they had the infamous one group dining in night. Everybody from one group, Scampton, Waddington, Cottesmore and that, went to have dinner together at Bawtry. Of course, on the way, they all had loads of booze in the buses with them and got absolutely rat-arsed before they got there. And the Minister of Defence who was coming there got pelted with oranges, bottles of wine, all sorts of things, because the rear crew were revolting about not having ejector seats like the pilot. It was something that went on all the time I was on Vulcan. It was dreadfully unfair. It was a killer machine to the rear crew, and it was wrong that the pilots could just bail out the way they could if they wanted to. And so we sort of lived with that. But what happened was they stopped training people on the NAT where they had no idea of how to handle a crew, and put them on the varsities where you were trained how to handle a crew in a multi-engine environment. So I was waiting, didn't know what was going to happen. I got a posting through to go to Oakington. I thought, damn, I'm not going on Vulcans. I'm going to be flying a Hercules or a Handover or a Shackleton or something like that. So while I was at Gaydon, I was lucky. I was running an air cadet camp, which was fine. But with the navigators, I was allowed to do things like Astro and stuff like that, which as a pilot you'd never do. But the navigators, they had all the lessons with it. So I had good grounding in that. When I came from that, I went to Oakington. Now, Oakington, if you know where it is, it's just outside Cambridge. And this is where we came across the students. We'd go out on a Saturday night for a beer, and then we'd get in a fight with students who were peace-loving ban the bomb merchants. But Oakington was lovely. The varsity was a sort of younger version of a Wimpy, Wellington. Very powerful couple of engines, and because there was nothing in it apart from us, it was very manoeuvrable. You could put takeoff flat down, put 2400 RPM on the engines and 60 pounds of boost, and you could turn on a 6-foot. Lovely airplane to fly. I enjoyed it immensely. We did about 130 hours on the JP. We did about 60 hours on the varsity. And then at the end of that, I got the posting that I was very hoping for. Tell me I was going on the Vulcan OCU. Before we did that, we just had to wait again for it to happen. And I was sent to Strubby. Now, Strubby was the school of refresher flying for people who had been on ground courses to refresh their skills before they went back onto a flying thing. And so we had the varsity there, and I got over 100 hours in a couple of months, flying with people who was historic. Group Captain Brown was now going to be an Air Commodore. He was going to run the Manby School of Air Warfare. And when I flew with him, it was remarkable. There were like three eyes looking out one way and none looking the other, because he had his patch on his eye. And when we went out, we went over the North Sea, and he had a friend that lived on the coast near Mablethorpe. So he decided he was going to buzz him on the way back. And we must have gone up this guy's garden path about 10 foot off the ground, buzzed over his head and came back home. When we got back, he complained about a low-flying aircraft. He didn't know who was in it. And it's quite nice when you're in trouble to be standing beside an Air Commodore who's the pilot, not you. But it was good. The Strubby people were very good. They also were being serviced by Airworks rather than RAF people. Now, one of the things I was going to remark on was, to me, the Air Force seemed to be two groups. There was the air crew, and then there was the ground crew. When I was going through as an officer of air crew, they never told us what the ground crew did. They didn't tell us what the Army did either, or the Navy. And you might think, well, it doesn't matter, but it does matter. If you were in an attack aircraft and you saw a group of troops coming in from one side of the area, you'd think that they were enemy rather than your own people doing a flanking attack or something like that. It was terrible. When I later went into the TA and I commanded an infantry unit and then a brigade, they had no idea how an aircraft would attack a bridge, and they would wait for hours to get support when they needed it in minutes. And we changed things, we got it going, but It was the same the other way around. The average air crew guy had no idea what the Navy did or how they worked, and they didn't know how the ground crew worked. And this is how you get situations where people say, well, Guy Gibson was a great pilot, but he was an arsehole to his guys on the ground. He probably didn't know any better, quite frankly. He didn't understand what they did. I think every now and again he would say he needed a gunner when he was flying on Heinz before the war, and he just ordered someone to get in the back cockpit. Um, we sort of, well, I'll tell you about it when we got on, what we did. But anyway, we got through Strubby, and then I went off to Finningley. Now, well, I got married while we were in this thing, and we had a mobile home, and the idea we'd have was move it around with us as we moved around. So we moved it to Bawtry, and I would go to Finningley every day, and we'd learn ground crew. Now, when you do the Vulcan ground course before you fly, it's mainly about the electronics. The Mark II is a massive electronic. The Mark I and Mark 1A were DC powered, and they were in terrible trouble if they lost power while they're airborne. They only got about 30 minutes on a battery to keep them going. On the Mark II, there's almost everything but a pair of pedals for you to pedal the power. We had a ram air turbine that lowered into the air if you were above 20,000 feet. Below that, you had an auxiliary airborne power pack, which was a jet engine that they used in the Rover race cars to put an alternator on it. So you were independent with that. And then each engine had a 40 kVA alternator on it. Now that gave you about enough power to power the average small town, one Vulcan. Now, it took ages for us to learn how to do it. The AEOs themselves, who were responsible for it, my AEO is the guy on the left. He was 50 years old when he came onto my crew, but you imagine the difference. I'm 22, he's 50. The guys in between are between 22. I was actually the youngest one in the crew when I got to be a captain. But anyway, we went through the course, and I was with a guy called Jack Manor Spencer. And the idea was I would go on to Waddington on 101 Squadron to be the first Mark II crew to go on 101. They'd still had the 1A. Now, the 1A used the old, I think Red Deer it was called, nuclear bomb. It's a huge thing, about the size of a house. You needed the Vulcan's bomb bay to get it on. But we were trained on the WE-177, which was a lovely piece of kit. It was about the size of a 1,000-pound bomb. And before we went to Finningley, we went to the nuclear weapons course at Wittering to see it and to learn how to use it. Perhaps that's it there. You can see it's not very large. That goes off at about 450 kilotons. To give you some idea, that is about 400 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. You've never seen pictures of that, so that's huge. And that's what the effect would be if it was dropped on St. Petersburg or, as we better go, Leningrad. You've got a crater half a mile wide by 300 feet deep in the middle, and then you get the radiation effect goes out to 20 miles. There's nothing much straight out there, and that's just one bomb from one Vulcan on Leningrad. It's amazing. What they'd done was, it was a fission fusion bomb, which then had deuterium added to the center when it went off. So the explosion was caused by one bomb gripping another bomb to the head, which in turn was set off by packs of very accurately manufactured explosives. The thing about nuclear weapons is you'd think anybody could make one, but the degree of engineering expertise and accuracy you need is phenomenal. And it's a very hard material to work with. But they cost about $250,000 each to make. Waddington had 30 of them, and that was it. And we were coming in, they were getting rid of their old bombs, and we were using the new one. Now you can see that what I've done there is that's what would happen if it exploded one on Leningrad. It would, we reckon it would kill 360,000 people, and there'd be 749,000 injured with one weapon. Now, if you take the whole of the bombs dropped by the RAF in the Second World War, it comes to a total of just under 1 million tons of bombs. Now, each bomb is about 60% case weight, and the rest of it is explosive. So, equivalent, all the bombs together would be equivalent to about 500,000 tons of TNT, every one of them together. We had all that power in one bomb, and it's staggering. You were never allowed to be alone with one. You had to have someone with you who could check what you did, and you could check what they did. If whatever it was, whether they were servicing or whatever, there had to be someone there. We had a control column panel on the side where you could set what you wanted to do. It was quite good. The smaller versions of it were used as depth charges. You imagine 10 kiloton thing like the size of the Hiroshima bomb, which was about 12 kiloton, going off in the North Sea, would kill a few fishes, and Russian submarines with it. But we used to always use it as ground burst with retard for the parachute to come out the back, right? So that the idea of that with retarded bombs is it gives you greater distance to get away with it before it goes bang, which would be 30 seconds after we released it. The nose cone would go off the end of the bomb, so it digged in rather than skidded across the ground. And then the 30 seconds was to stop someone on the airfield driving over it with a tractor or something and try to disable it. And then it would go off. 1,000-pound bombs that we carried different variants of that. We had retarded. It goes off under the aircraft. It's not like the movies where you see them dropping bombs and they're going off. The bomb's traveling at the same speed as you are. So when it eventually hits the ground, it's underneath you. You have to be, with us, we had to be 2,500 feet above ground before, with 1,000-pounder going off, or else you got shrapnel from it, damaging your own aircraft. We did an attack called the 2J, where we came in low level, popped up to 2,500 feet, dropped the weapons, and went back down again. Now, in a modern environment, you can't pop up anywhere without getting your head chopped off. So, retarded were the things to do. Now, within that, with new ordinary weapons like that, the bombing, the nav radar, had a 90-way bomb selector. So you could drop them in any different orders, in any different spacing, and any different period of time. So if you wanted them close, you could drop them every split second or 10 seconds. You can have a mixture of bombs on board with delayed action fuses in, so that they go off at various periods, anything up to a day after you drop them. Or there could be fragmentation. And the fragmentation bombs had a thinner case, and it was sort of all granulated inside. Looked like a bar of chocolate. And the idea was when it went off, everybody got some. So if you were using it against ground troops or an environment like that, there'd be just a massive fragments come out, 1,000 pounds of fragments at about 200 yard spacings. It would take 3 ground troops out. I was amazed they didn't use them on the Vulcans, and I thought delayed action weapons would have been as good as dropping the high explosives they did, because it would have stopped someone landing for much longer. Anyway, there we go. So by the time we got to Waddington, we'd turn that one off, Tanya. By the time we got to Waddington, we'd done a nuclear weapons course and conventional weapons course. We'd done a sea survival course, and we'd also been to North Loughton. Now, the Vulcan can go up to about 40,000 feet. When you're above that, you can go up to 56,000 feet. if you're going to be there and you lose cabin pressure, you can't breathe the oxygen. Once you're above 40,000 feet, you have to have the oxygen fed to you at pressure to force it across into your lungs. Now, when you're very high, that can be at 70 millimeters pressure. And given scenario, you don't breathe in, the oxygen forces itself into your lungs, and what you have to do is force it out. You have a pressure jerk in and a pressure machine to help you with that, but it's very tiring. You can only do it for about 10 minutes because you're actually using your body in reverse what it should be. So you came. You got to Waddington. They give you a nice, neat V-Force uniform to wear. So because you were on standby, you didn't want to be in a flying suit all the time. We had a very neat cut jacket and trousers. You could wear a G-suit underneath the trousers with the air ventilated suit fin coming out of the pocket, and the top was two zips down the side. Quite close fitting instead of being like the L'Oreal uniform. Right? These are just normal flying suits. I think you got one. Now, when you got to the unit, you weren't qualified to do anything. You were non-operational. So you had to, first of all, do your target study. Every crew had their own target, and you also had to cover the QRA target for your squadron. Now, all the time we were there was one aircraft from each squadron on standby at 15 minutes alert. I had been doing that since the Vulcan Force started virtually. You about once, maybe twice a week, one weekend in maybe 3, you were the crew that were on QRA. So you had to learn the QRA targets, and you could cover that. Mostly in the national targets, it was Moscow or Leningrad or a similar city to that. If it was part of the NATO target, it would be a big military base that was concerned with the defence, but alongside a town. So you took the military out, but you took the town with it. We were there basically to blast our way in for the B-52s to come after us, which brings another thing into question. We had a foreman's alert, which was the time we got from the people at Fylingdale seeing a weapon coming towards the GB. It'd probably been launched slightly before that, but once they could see it, 4 minutes later, it was going to hit Waddington. Now, I think during the 80s, we had a period when we were friendly with the Russians. I certainly did when I was in Germany with the TAs, Russians. But every V-Force base and every dispersal that we had 2 nuclear weapons targeted on it, and each of them at least a megaton. So you can make your boots that a 4-minute warning really meant what it said. Now, it gave you 4 minutes to get airborne, get out of the area at least 7 miles away, and hopefully about 7,000 feet, so you avoided the blast from the incoming. Now, when we were on QRA, say we were on 15 minutes alert, any time, day or night, you get a exercise alert every day, some time or other, to make sure you were awake. And it was called an exercise either. You'd hear it, the traffic would be stopped on the A15. Everybody would watch as we went scurrying towards the aircraft, got in, or got loaded up, taxied out, we were on a 02 to the runway and stood there and waited. Or 05, we got in and we just waited in the cockpit. And then there was another one, which was start engines, where we just started it up to make sure it was serviceable and closed it down. Everything had to be done in a certain time. If it wasn't, you finished up seeing station commander and getting it in the net. It had been done for ages. The whole of the unit was on I don't know what you'd call it, but if they said that they were preparing for war, the whole of Waddington had to have all its aircraft serviceable and ready, bombed up within 24 hours. Now, if you've worked with aircraft, I know a lot of you have, it's not always possible to get an aircraft that's on a major service or something like that ready in 12, 14 hours, just when you want to do it. So what they had to do was, if you did a major service on a Vulcan, it was done in maybe 3 different days with different amounts, so that you never had it off the airfield for more than 3 to 4 hours. It made everything wrong, but we called it centralised servicing. It meant that you couldn't have an aircraft of your own. You could only have an aircraft which came up at that point in time to be servicing. So I was on them for 6 years, and in those 6 years I flew 46 different Vulcans. Very rarely flew the same one twice, because in between you flying it, it would have to be service ready for the next one. It was incredibly worrying for the ground crew. Waddington's not the sunniest place on the earth, and where it is at the top of that hill, it's windy, it's foggy, and it's cold, and it was miserable. When the early days when Group Captain Brown was there, we put special things on for them. We eventually finished up with another nice station man called Griffiths, and then he in turn was replaced by a guy called Hall, who was an absolute bastard. The lads would work all night on an exercise or something, and then he wouldn't give them time off afterwards. We had an award from the ground crew. They had Pig of the Week. Their slogan for themselves was Pig, pride, integrity, and guts. And anybody they disliked enormously, they'd present them with a pig, a model of a pig. And he came in one morning to find one by his door. We went through the roof, but it showed what people thought of it. We eventually, as a crew, finished up not with squadron badges on our shoes, but with a pig. We were the ground crew's crew. Anyway, back to the beginning again. So, whilst the rest of the crew were QFI to teach them to do low level, I was given the job of becoming Squadron Combat Survival and Rescue Officer as my secondary duty, and also for the chipmunk flying for the air cadets when that happened. So I disappeared off the Cranmore, got myself an hour and a half duel in Cranmore, and I was solo, and so I'm now the chipmunk man for Waddington, and I had a chipmunk thing like that. I think there were 2 other guys on the station who could fly propeller aircraft, and between us we did the air cadet camps when they came. So we've probably been on the station for about a month. I hadn't flown. While I was at the OCU, I think I got 3 trips as a co-pilot to learn the job, and then 4 or 5 trips with the crew. So wasn't too bad, but I couldn't very well handle one on my own at that sort of thing. We then started flying in our own. If I can, I don't know how to say something. You probably never experienced it, but the rest of the crew were like a public schoolboy outfit. I wasn't. I was working class John from Boston. I didn't really fit in with them. I could fly, I was skillful enough at it, but we just didn't get on very well. And it kept on like that for about 6 months. We were doing everything else. We did everything was asked of us. I did, but in the first 6 months, I didn't get to fly the aircraft once. I did all my co-pilot's duty, which was looking after the fuel, looking after the back reading when you were low level, doing everything that was asked of me, but I'd never flown the aeroplane. I never landed one. I'd never taxied one or anything like that. Just done my job as a co-pilot. I'd have one trip with the wing commander that checked me out. He'd let me fly it, obviously. But I was in a state where after 6 months, I was useless as a pilot. And then I came in one morning and the co-pilot on the crew that were going out to Goose Bay that week was sick. And so they said, right, you're off to Goose Bay. And I went with a guy called Mick Burr. We went to the aircraft, started it up, got ready to taxi out and said, okay, it's all yours. I thought, oh, Christ, what do I do? Am I going to tell him? Couldn't do it. So we got ourselves down to the end of the runway and I did the takeoff. As soon as we were airborne, he took it off and said, what the bloody hell was that? He was entirely embarrassed. I said, look, I'm flying. I told him what had happened. He just looked at me and he said, right, I'm not handling the stick until we get back. You've got it. And he stood by his word. We went out to Goose Bay. We did 4 or 5 low-level trips all around Canadian wilderness. The first one we did was at 500 feet, which was what we were supposed to do at that stage. And again, he said, what the hell are you doing up here? And we went down and down until we were flying at about 200 feet. And he said, right, hold it there or lower. And off we went. I was marvelous. By the time I came back, I was feeling really good. I could do everything I needed to do, and he was happy too. In fact, so much when we took off, he buzzed the other side of the Goose Bay airfield where all the KC-135 fuel tankers were waiting for the Americans, which got us into trouble. So when we landed, it was my second time in front of a senior officer getting a bollocking for breaking up the Americans at Goose Bay. But the result of it was our new wing commander, Burley, said, right, get him on a crew and let him learn. So I was put on another crew, Nick Hillard's crew. He was the squadron QFI, and he got all the special jobs, which was rather nice. We got to do the Queen's birthday fly past. I think there's a picture of Tanya. It should be the Vulcan with the 4 lightnings on it. We got to do that. We got to do the Unity drop, which was the dropping the 21,000-pound bombs in front of all the Army top brass on Salisbury Plain. We got to do the air shows, and we got a trip to Florida to do the display at Pensacola. So off we went to America and got down to Pensacola. Now, what had happened at one group is they'd got the airfields wrong. What they really meant us to go to was McGill, which became Orlando International Airport. Pensacola was the place for the Navy, the American Navy, to do their basic training with pilots. And instead of being 11, 12,000 foot long as we normally, it was only about 7. So why we didn't check all of that, I don't know. I wasn't the captain, Nick was. We got to Pensacola. We did the display, and what we're going to work out, we're going to have to stream the chute. Now, we had a spare chute in the bomb bay with our spares, but if we streamed one landing and put another one in, we weren't going to be able to do the display itself the following day, because we wouldn't be able to get back, because you couldn't, no one there could repack the chute. The tail chute on a Vulcan is huge. It's about 45 foot across, and it sticks in the tail. It takes a lot of skill to actually fit it in and get the thing closed. So what we agreed with them before we left, we'd do a display for them to film so they could show on the local TV. And Mick went mad. He did a barrel roll going down wind. We just blew the place to pieces. Now, the normal sort of numbers that they would get at their shows was about 40,000 people. They finished up with close on 110,000. And everybody was going through the roof. It was awful. what we didn't realise is that the American Navy, like the British Navy, have bounty payments. You know, if they capture a ship, they all get some of it. But when they do air shows, they get some of the attendance. So depending on your rank, you've got a certain percentage of what comes to the gate. So when you double the crowd, you've got double the amount. They were absolutely mindless about it. The Admiral gave us his driver and his car and let you go anywhere you want around the local area. And we had a wonderful time for a couple of days. We flew back. Now, on the way back, Mick, don't know whether he did it deliberately to test me out or whether we were coming back towards Dims Bay, to come from, say, 40,000 feet down on an approach, you normally start to descend about 220 miles out. I was just co-pilot and I was doing the fuel things when the plotter came on and said, I've missed the descent point. I said, well, said to Mick looked as if he was dozing. And when it turned out he wasn't very well, quite frankly. And he just looked and said, deal with it, John. I said, okay, let's do a circuit down. We'll wind our way down and we'll see if we can get down to Goose. Now, Goose weather wasn't very good. We had overcast. We were going to get the chance to do one approach. And if we didn't get in, we were going to have to go to Gander, which was quite a way away because we didn't have fuel to do another circuit and mess it again. We'd be just lost. So I set off down and we finished up going over Goose Bay eventually at about 1,000 foot too high. So I said, right, okay, we'll divert to Gander. And we went to Gander. Now, you probably know this, but when in the early days of going across the Atlantic, they couldn't make London to New York in one go. They used to go London, Shannon to Goose Bay or Gander, then Gander down to New York, because they didn't have the range. And Gander is a wonderful airport. It looks like London Airport. Huge, great concourses everywhere, and it's completely empty. We landed there and there was nobody there. We had to do We had to do an internal aids approach using our own radar because they weren't manning their own stuff. And we landed and we refueled ourselves, got out some stuff out the bomb bay, put it on the floor and slept in what would have been the concourse area for passengers. The next morning we took off and we flew back. But it was a strange experience. After I'd been with Mick for a while, one of the crews was really getting cheesed off with its pilot. His name was Al White. He wanted to be a test pilot. He'd been trained on that, and his ability as a captain, he could fly all right, but he just didn't consider his crew at all. I mean, little things matter in situations like this. If you're taxiing down the runway and you're going to brake to a halt, you tell the crew, because otherwise they spill their coffee or mark their maps or something. It's just good man. Never did any of that. And they were getting cheesed off with it. He also used to do silly things like we landed at Gan once with him. He said, look, I'll show you how to turn it round quick. Put all the brakes on, spinning it round and burst 4 tyres. And imagine changing a tyre on a Vulcan is not the same as a car. The crew chiefs were really cheesed off of it. But anyway, his nav team had said it had enough. I was called in and the wing commander said, right, John, I'd done my intermediate captain's course at the time, so I was now left-hand qualified. He said, you're going to fly with Al's crew, but you are to fly all the time. You are to sit in the left-hand seat. He can make the tactical decision, but you decide what happens with the airplane. He stood for me and said, right, that's the way it's going to be, Al. Otherwise, we're going to have to take disciplinary action and break the crew up. And that in force terms was pretty bad. So I then had a lovely period of time for about 6 months when I just got in the aircraft and I flew it. We went all over. We did an 18 aircraft string takeoff at one point for the I think it was the ambassador for the Argentines at the time, and we did another one for the defence lot. We had during the bombing competition, we had some American B-52s came in, and we took a couple of their guys around there. But I was having a wonderful time. We eventually went out on the moon flare. Now, what the B-Force did in those days, they had to not only be capable of looking after the UK, they had to look after the Far East as well. Cottesmore had sent detachments of Vulcans down when the Indonesians were playing up, and their job was down there was you had conventional bombs to drop on the Indonesian terrorists that came across Indonesia, but they had nuclear weapons to use against the Chinese if things blew up into an international conflict. We went, that song Kong Lovey, that's something, okay? We went out there and we flew around Malaya and then Borneo, and then eventually we went down to Australia and we exercised with the Australians in Darwin. That was exciting because at the time they had the new Sabres and Mirage 5s. And Mirage 5 had a head-on capability, which the Lightnings and everyone else hadn't had. Whilst we were used to aircraft trying to attack us from the rear, it was a new experience to try and stop them getting you from the front. It's again another thing not people know about, but you can drop 12,000 feet in a Vulcan in 1.5 minutes. If you pull the nose back, put the eye drag out, and keep the speed right. A delta doesn't stall like a normal wing. A normal wing on an aircraft stalls at about 15 degrees. On a delta, like the Vulcan, it's 47 to 50 degrees. So you actually are falling through the air because you're not putting enough thrust in to keep yourself airborne. But at the same time, the aircraft itself, the air is still going over the wings and it's technically flying. All you've got to do is put the power back on and it will come out of it. So if we had someone coming at us head on, what we used to do was to drop the IRDs, rapid movement window, and just drop. The Mirages would keep on going straight, thinking they'd got their target, and we would be something like about 10,000 feet below. It seemed to work all right at the time. Low level, they've now brought in the no level evasive maneuver. We had Red Steer 2, the little bulge you see at the end of the Vulcan's tail houses the Red Steer aerial. It's like a mini little radar, and anything that comes around behind you, you can pick it up on that. And the X-band jammer it's got in it, as soon as the radar tries to lock on you, which you could hear it squeal, the X-band would throw it off into circle again, which meant the guy couldn't let his missiles go because they hadn't got a lock on to go with. When they had semi-active missiles where the missile itself would be looking at you, what we did then, as it came in towards you, we did what was called a low-level evasive maneuver. That basically went from whatever height you're at, which at the time was probably about 100, 150 feet. You pulled it into a big climbing turn to the left, pull the power off. You see it in air displays when they do it, but they leave the power on. But when you were low level and being attacked, you took the power off. The heat seekers on the attacking missiles would then pick up the IRD decoys as they came out of the skin rather than concentrate on the engine. Technology was such in those days that the missiles had been programmed. They saw a gap between the aircraft skin and down below. They would assume it was a decoy. But we had what we called the IRDs were burning as they came out the aircraft. And the rapid blooming window, instead of chaff like it would be drop and then split, again split as it came out the bottom of the aircraft. So as far as the attacking aircraft radar was concerned, it was just one constant thing, and we were breaking on the left. Now, again, if you look at Vulcans, you'll see behind them is a big curling exhaust plume. Looks a bit like, it looks quite pretty, But if you get caught in that at low level behind the Vulcan, it puts you into the ground. When we did the trials in the Bristol Channel, the Sea Vixen coming in against us was flipped on its back into the Bristol Channel. We only did it once. When the Sea Vixen to do it twice. But it was incredible. And to test the IRDs, we had lightnings firing red tops with concrete warheads in, from about 5 miles back to see that they got carried off. So it was pretty good. Anyway, I reached the end of my first time as a co-pilot. I did just short of 2 years, you're supposed to do 3, but I got accelerated into my captain's course. It was the same thing again. You went up down to Mount Hatton. You did the sea survival element. We did the armaments element, and then came back to the Aeromedical Training Centre, back to Waddington. This time I was on 50 Squadron. 50 Squadron had the Mark II for a while, and they were very good. They were under Wing Commander Smith. You might see him in some of your literature. He was the poor guy that lost the nose wheel off the Vulcan when he took off. The ground crew towing the aircraft round had gone too far round to the left and snapped the oleo connection inside the tube, the front nose wheel. And so when he took off and the nose wheel stayed on the ground. He flew around to burn fuel off, gave his crew the option of bailing out while he came round and landed it. The co-pilot stayed with him, but both navigators decided they wanted to jump out. And they did that over the airfield, and unfortunately one of the parachutes handled. So the whole of the station watched this poor guy drop to his death in the middle of the airfield. The parachute packing section girl, one of them had a nervous breakdown on the spot. It was an awful thing to see, but he was now the wing commander, and he was a great guy. We did our initial training, did the low-level training, and we'd been on the unit for about 3-4 months, 4 weeks. We were sent to Goose Bay. We did the Goose Bay first one, and we were I was quite well known there. I've been friendly with the Canadians who were running the site. And Jim McDonald, whenever we used to call up approaching Goose, he'd say, go rough air, whatever our call sign was. Time check, Mickey Mouse's little hand is on the 4 and his big hand is on the 10. and take the Mickey out of him. But we would take Johnny Walker Black Rebel, Bristol Cream Sherry, and flowers across to them and their wives on the base. And then while we were there, they would often invite us around for dinner. And it was quite a nice environment. We got to love Goose. In the winter, it was a dreadful place. Can you show the original one now, Tanya, of the Vulcan with the snow on it? What used to happen was when you landed, the guys on the ground could only work for about 10 minutes on the aircraft before they were told to go inside and warm up again. This is typical of what an aircraft would look like. This one's been left out at night time, and they put the stuff around the wheels to try and stop the freezing. The problem was the rubber seals would just go solid, and so the hydraulic fluid would leak out and be unusable. You can't sweep the snow off a Vulcan or any aircraft the way you normally used to do if it's still got ordinary compass in it. You probably did it at school, where you stroked a piece of metal and made it into a needle for a compass. The same thing happens if you sweep the wings of an aeroplane in the same thing. You change the magnetic field in the aircraft, which means you've got to reswing the compass to take care of it. So in the morning, you have to be very careful what you do. If they had enough space, we had one hangar. And if you were there for a week doing the Goose routes, they would put you in the hangar. And what you did was crewed up in the hangar, open the hangar doors, and then started up, and they would push you out with the aircraft starting into the cold, and you were okay. Once you've got the aircraft going, warm air from the engines is fed down the wings, and the anti-icing system is great. So you were fine. The only problem with operating in those conditions is that hard ice can crack the undercarriage the wheels, the support for the framework for the wheels. You have to be careful what you do. Goose, it wasn't rare. It snowed from about the end of August, early September through till the end of May the following year. There was often 20 plus feet of snow, and the temperature would go down to minus 15, 20, and then you had the wind chill factor on top. Every 5 knots of wind dropped it down another degree. So you could finish up with minus 25 out there. You put your hands on the metal, your hands stuck to the metal. You had to wear gloves all the time. If you bailed out anywhere around the local area that there's a problem, it could take up to 60 days to rescue. The Labrador and Newfoundland area is beautiful, but there's nobody there, and there's nowhere to come and get you. Somebody would have to come in a dog sled, or they'd have to do sort of hops with a helicopter to get here. So we used to wear special smoke plugs over our flying boots. I've got a picture of Ken there, Tanya. You can find
A
it.
picture of which one, Dad?
It's Ken, my navigator. There's one of him just walking out of the hood.
I don't think I've got those pictures, Dad. I don't think I got those in time. We can probably share them afterwards.
All right. We used to carry an overcoat with a wolverine collar on it, each crew member. Now, wolverine fur will not freeze. It's one of the things that the animal lives around. We had wolverine around us. We had cold weather flying gear. We had special acrylic pile underwear that we wore. And so we could survive fairly well in the cold, but I wouldn't like to have tried it. We used to do routes out of Goose. The shortest was about 2 hours. So traveling at 240 knots, you'd go 500 odd miles or so. Generally, you did about 1,000 miles low level. But it was the most beautiful country I've ever been. Totally unspoiled. In spring and autumn, when the water was running and the streams were running, it was beautiful. And you knew that no one had ever been there. Just fantastic. And it was like it would have been flying over the steppes to Russia. So it was wonderful practice. We did that. We just got back from that, and we were sent to Malta. Now, every year what was happening was, in order to give you time off, so they have a good time, they put one squadron into what was called a sunspot exercise. We went down to Malta and operated out of there for 2 weeks. The first week you simulated being a Badger or a Bear reconnaissance aircraft and trying to find the American fleet that was drifting up and down the Mediterranean and report on it. The second week, you then became an attack aircraft and you attacked the fleet. This is what I've done. You can see this if you go onto the internet, YouTube, you'll find the Franklin D. Roosevelt 1971 Med Cruise. There's the bit where I'd attacked it and came around to do a flyover, and they escorted me as I came over. But that aircraft carrier has got 137 aircraft on it. Yeah, it's amazing. I just want to say, but when you were flying out against it, we went on the first raid of the first day of the attack phase. We went through Greece, down the Corinth Canal, and we stayed low level. I've given you some idea how low we were. My AEO, as I told you, was 50 years old. He'd started flying before the Second World War, and he was on Blenheims during the first years of the war out in the Middle East. And as we were going along, he never said much generally. He said, "Do you know what, Captain?" I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I flew down here in 1941. And we were being chased by an ME-109, and we were a fucking sight higher than this." And we went in really low. We never picked up their surveillance radar on our listeners. We got in off the coast, and he put himself about 5 miles off the coast, which meant his protection vehicles were like in a fan around seaward, but nothing on the inside. So we came up from the land, attacked him, put 21,000 pounds of bombs simulated across him, and there should be a picture of it on there.
Yeah, I'm going to try and play it. I'll have to just drag the video, but you'll be able to see this. So just a second here. Let me just drag it. It'll up to about 6. There we go. And I think that's the only footage that exists of it. That I think is kind of exciting. Love the sound of the Vulcans.
Have you got the one where you've got my bomb picture of it? There's one that should.
No, I don't have that one. Sorry, not in this series. I do think it would be interesting, Dad, to maybe talk about the typhoon that you ended up in.
We'll do that at the end. How are we doing, fellas?
Yeah, how are we doing for time? And do we have any questions? Everyone's very quiet.
I think
I've got questions,
Matthew...
but I don't want to interrupt. I'm loving it. You carry on.
You're loving it. Oh, good. Okay, yeah.
Matthew had his hand up for a question. Matthew?
Yeah, Matthew. Speak up.
Yeah, a quick question. How often would you have sort of a deployment in Malta? Is it like once a year? Or...
Sorry, say it again, Matthew. I didn't hear you.
How often would you have sort of a deployment to Malta? Like once a year? Was it just once in your career?
Generally, one squadron do it 1 year, one do it the next. It was every year. It went on for years. You'd have to between 4 and 8 aircraft, depending on what they wanted to do. You'd fly low level over Greece, Italy, and exercise their air forces as well. The only problem was we weren't allowed to evade overland because of the danger to the population. But it was good fun. And Malta, in those days, was a tremendous place to be. It had been, they used to call the middle of it the gut, and it had been the place to take for sailors and goodness knows what. You went down there on a Saturday night and it was unbelievable. We went down the first week we were there, and we'd been drinking at each of the bars on the way down. We got right to the bottom of what they call the gut, and there was I think it's a Union Jack club or something, and we were drinking in there when one of the ground crew that was with us started nipping the bum of one of the waitresses, and she screamed, and the other stewards came out and started throwing beer at us. And we then had a running fight all the way down the street with people going in, till by the time we got to the top, it was a riot. We had to get a taxi to get the hell out of it. Yeah, it was good fun. Malta's a nice place. Really is. I met Tanya's mum there. She was on deployment because we take some of the people from air traffic, some of the people offline, and all the rest of it. We go with us to help the locals out. I sort of fell in love with her mum there, and we got married when I left the Air Force. It was it was quite nice. But anyway, we did that, and the next thing that would be interesting for us, we did a westabout reinforcement of the Far East. Now, instead of going out through the Mediterranean and the Middle East, you went through America and across the Pacific. We got out to Goose Bay. We did our usual stuff in Goose down to Offutt. Offutt we'd go out to McClellan, and then we'd go across to Hawaii, then Guam, Wake, Guam, and then Tonga. And then after a while there, we did our exercises and we went down to Australia again and came back. Now, one aircraft would get the chance to go to Hong Kong. And this is some of the stuff that Tanya's got. Up until about 95, they had the old runway at Hong Kong was active. This is it. You see the city that you there. If you look at the back of the city, you see a white board, and I'll put it in the sort of end of the runway up a bit. There, you see that white one up there? What you had to do was do a circuit at 1,000 feet across a city. You got to the board, and that gave you the point where you could turn for the runway. You 600 feet by the time you got up there, and then flying almost between the blocks of flat, you then landed on the runway. It was the most dangerous approach in the world. I don't know how they kept it safe, but that's what you had to do. There's your holding pattern to start it that way. That's if you go in the other way. But this is all houses, and that's mountain at the back. Once you committed to it, you would have to go for it. It was just unbelievable. We set up the simulator at Waddington so that we could practice it. You weren't supposed to go there unless you'd been before, but as my navigator had been before and Jim, the AO, had been before, so we counted that and they were happy. But there's the checkerboard. If you look on the internet, you'll see approaches for it. It's like behind it is this huge hill. The checkerboard itself has got lights around it, and it just looks like a sort of red and white checkerboard. And you flew along till you got there. You got these little markers came up on your ILS, and at that point you turned 45-degree turn, and then descended onto the runway. It was hellish, really difficult. You couldn't go any other way because you basically got China, communist China, all around you, and the islands off Hong Kong were full of Chinese anti-aircraft stuff. So you flew what you told them. But they actually got Concorde in there. They used to get the big airliners went in there. But if you watch the videos of them doing it, I wouldn't like to have been a passenger on any of them. But we got a free weekend there, so we went off. Now, on the way from Tanya in Singapore to Hong Kong, you have to go past Vietnam. And as we were flying up towards Vietnam, we called for clearance to go through the airspace, and they came back and said, denied. I think, well, what's the problem? And what basically came out of it was there was a raid going into Vietnam, B-52, and there was no space to go through. And I said, well, what flight levels are available above it? The B-52 at its best could only get around about 40, 50,000 feet. So they said flight levels over 600, which is 60,000 feet. So we went across 62,000 feet, which was unbelievable. We got the other side, the end came down and landed. Before we went low level, the Vulcans would regularly go up to 63,000 feet. So it wasn't something that I was worried about, but a good job we just didn't lose cabin pressurization, which only was good up to 56,000. But we sailed across it. Had a good time in Hong Kong, and the next day we came back. When we got back to Tanya, we had a white cliff. Now, if you're on the V-force, you get a white cliff. It means you've got to make all effort to get back as quick as you can. In this case, it would mean getting back to Waddington. Instead of doing it in single stages, you do it in 2 stages a day. So instead of us going from Singapore to Guam, we'd have to go Singapore, Guam, then wait. Now, the flight from Singapore to Guam is about 3,000 something miles. It's a long, long way. And it's one of the few places where you actually have point of no return, where you're going down it, you get to a point where you just physically cannot go back because you haven't got the range to do it. And the island in the middle of the Pacific has not got an awful lot of people near it. And when we set off to go there, we had a clear weather report. Don't forget, in those days, there were no satellites. What you got was a weatherman's guess at what the weather was going to be like. And they said it should be fine, all the rest of it. We got close to the PNR, and so I got Tilly to call ahead and see what get a weather report. They said it's beginning to cloud over, but it's okay. So we carried on past the PNR. The next time we checked in, an hour later, we found that Typhoon Lola was approaching the island, and the cloud was just unbelievable. It piled up in front of us in space of about an hour. And again, I thought, well, we'll see if we can go over it, because we ran out to go through it. I got up to 60-odd thousand again, and we went towards Guam. All the B-52s were getting out and going everywhere else, and the front of this typhoon was going across the island. And let's give you some idea what it's like. Now, because of the warming effect of the water everywhere in the Pacific, their tropical storms are huge. We're talking about 300-400 miles across. We were storming in towards this. You know you're in trouble when you're a pilot because the aircraft goes quiet. Nobody talks, nobody chatters, but the normal chatter you have, it's just quiet and they're watching what you're doing. You couldn't use the autopilot because it was going up and down too much. It was each time you put it in, the stick shaker would break, so we flew it manually. As we got to the island, we came into the eye of the storm, and you could actually see down through to the end to the island. So I curved around in it. It's an unimaginable thing to do, but I did. And we landed at Guam. The place was a wreck. There were bits of trees and everything else, and the back edge of the storm was going to come across in about an hour. So we all piled on to the refuel and got ourselves refueled and took off again towards Wake, which was in this direction. Now, at least we were going that way and the storm was coming that way, so we'd get through it quicker than we did coming into the island. And we got to Wake, which is about 1,500 miles away, and landed there, and we were swimming in the lagoon with the turtles and what have you in the afternoon, having just nearly died getting there. We had the night, we refueled again, we went from Wake to Hawaii to San Francisco. We stopped in San Francisco and we did San Francisco, off at Goose, we refueled, went back to Waddington, got to Waddington. We've been away for 6 weeks, landed, they put us straight onto Readiness 1-5, put a nuke on board, took the thing off, and we spent 2 days waiting on a MiG. They agreed they wouldn't send us off flying, we could go home after that way. And so we did. The most amazing flight I've ever done. And I was weary of thunderstorms after that. The worst place for really bad storms was the Midwest, where you could be doing low level around Norfolk and areas like that, and then these storms would blow up in the afternoon, and you could literally see them growing in front of you. And that would be it. Right, well, I'm about it, man. Anybody got questions so far? Anything? There must be something you've always wanted to ask about Vulcans.
Hi, John. I think I was gonna say that actually, if we pause for a bit to get some questions in, because obviously it's been absolutely brilliant listening to you. I think people are just so interested in listening to you. That's why they're just waiting for an opportunity to ask questions. So if we just wait 5 minutes or so to get people in some questions. So if anyone's got some, use the raise your hand option or send me a message. But I know Keith's been wanting to ask a question, so we'll start with Keith.
Oh, I think I'm through them now. Am I? Can everybody hear? Can you hear me, John?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can hear you, Pete.
Oh, excellent. So I've been following Matt's talks since lockdown, and they've all been absolutely excellent. But I must say, this is the best one ever. This is really good. Thank you very, very much. So just I've got a couple of questions really. If you had ever had to go and drop the bomb, um, then what precautions would you take? How would you? Is that I heard about yeah, an eye patch? I don't know if that's true or not. And where would you go afterwards?
Right. This thing about people saying they'd fly off to somewhere warm and whatever, we actually had bases we would go back to. The whole route was planned. The eye patch is because if you're within about 20 miles of a nuclear burst and you're looking at it, it blinds you. You just lose your eyesight. So as a pilot, you wore an eye patch on one eye if you did look out, and then the other eye would still be good. And each pilot would do that. On a war mission, you black the whole aircraft out. I don't know again if you've looked in the Vulcan, they've got the black curtains which pull up across the whole of the front, the sides, and then the portholes. And there's another black curtain that comes down between the pilots and the rear crew. So you would do that. And when you took off on a war mission, you'd have one section of that down on the pilot who was flying, and he would wear an eye patch because the first bomb is going to be that one that was by the time you got airborne climbing away, there's going to be the flash from that. When you've dropped your own bomb, you accelerated into the target. You'd be doing, on a war mission, you'd be doing between 325 and 350 knots. As you did the attack, you went up to 375. When you dropped the weapon, you went up to the maximum, which was 415. And then we weren't briefed to climb away. We were told to go up about 10 miles and then turn and come back almost alongside the burst. And as you climbed away, you switched all the jammers on. Now, it's the only time you ever used the ECN. You sent a report through to an HF to base that gave an assessment of how accurate your bomb was, what it went off of, whether it was a full burst or not. And you then climbed out. Now, each one had a recovery base, so if it didn't have a recovery base, it gave you somewhere you could head towards and then bail out. I personally never had one that bad. We were equipped, because the weapon was now so small, you could get 2 drum tanks in the bomb bay, which were 8,000 pounds each, and a weapon in between them. Whereas with the originals, were blue steel. You had a shaped tank at the front, and that was it. You couldn't carry much fuel, but it was close. You'd get back to base as long as nothing gone wrong with maybe 4,000-6,000 pounds of fuel in the tanks, which in the Vulcan was pretty low. You got 14 tanks to spread that around with electric motors running, trying to pump it out. But I mean, I got all sorts of places. Turkey was quite favourable that I was directed back to. I don't know what they'd have done with you when you got you there, because they didn't have any more weapons. We literally at Waddington, we had one load of 1,000-pound retarded for each aircraft and one bomb per aircraft, and that was it. The 177 had to be re-energized because the deuterium used to go down about 5% per year. So for over 5 years, it lost 25% of its effectiveness. So it would go to, they had a secret weapons establishment at Foldingway, which is a little village on the outskirts of Waddington. And for years, it never even used to appear on maps. You buy an ordnance service map, and this place wouldn't be there. It is now, but that's where it used to service the bombs and service the blue steel. But we would be directed to a specific area. The problem we had coming back was the whole of Central Europe had a brick wall defensive area. You fly in there and they didn't know who you were, you had it. you didn't transmit anything from takeoff to the point where you were coming back through the brick wall area and telling people what would have happened. But there was usually somewhere to come back to. Whether you'd actually got there, I don't know. We did a lot of work on it. I was working with the gentleman that was writing the book that's just been published on it. And we reckoned maybe 2-3 aircraft would get through. But what surprised us was that every aircraft flew the same route and had more or less the same target. That's the book. It took 7 years to write that between us. He had about 70 different people from the V-Force helping, from ground crew through to air crew. You find there's quite a bit from me in it. I say I don't know what you do. I imagine getting out of the aircraft, you've just been through 2 nuclear explosions. So God knows what state you would personally be in. The aircraft, when I went to Waddingham the first time, where they were practicing aircraft coming back, they used to go through a decontamination centre. They put a paper tunnel to the door on the aircraft, tape it round, the crew would come out, strip off, go through the showers, and then the aircraft itself would be washed down by the fire trucks. But would they do that for us in Norway or something like that? I don't know. You see, they didn't tell you anything. You never knew anybody else's target or your own. You certainly didn't know any of the routes. It was quite apparent to us we were going through Sweden and Norway to get to Russia, but Sweden was supposed to be neutral. But we did do a lot of work with the Norwegians, but we would have gone out to the North Sea, turned in over Norway, gone down through Norway, through Sweden, and then there were 2 routes in. I can only imagine that the Canberras and Buccaneers in Germany would have blasted those coastal areas for us to get through. But once you were behind them, you were on your own. And again, I'll take you through it if you want. It's got when you're flying low level in a Vulcan, because of the flat, because of what's going on, you basically were using either TFR or using the navigators were talking you through it. What would happen is that a nav plotter would tell you where you should be. The nav radar would be tilting his radar to see what was in front of you, and the co-pilot would occasionally look out to tell them where it was, where they were. So the sort of conversation that we're going on would be, you need to be at this height, and that would be 500 feet above the nearest ground height. You'll be doing the speed, and then the nav radar would say, you're clear, or there's blackout coming up 5 miles, and then you'd start to climb up to go over it until he could see over it, rather like a TFR, and then talk you down. And this would go on all the way. It was extremely difficult to shoot a Vulcan down at low level. Very difficult. Some 2s, when I first went on them, couldn't acquire you below 1,500 feet. Some 3s were around about 750. And then you got the others came through, the 6s and things, were point defense. And they could get you down to about 200 feet, but only within about 3 miles of their position. The amount of effort that went into supporting the V-Force was enormous. 2 squadrons of Comets regularly flew around the borders, reporting in what frequencies were looking at them, what stuff they saw. You had 543 going taking pictures. In the early days, they were going over the border. The strangest thing that I got when I first saw my first briefing in the target study room was you got a paper of what was actually happening in Russia from the embassies and the intelligence people. And right from day one, we were exporting grain to Russia because their harvest was fake. The Americans were exporting Russia 1 million tons a year of grain from 1961. And by the time we got to the 1970s, it was 30 million tons of grain a year for them to keep going. Now, if you watch the TVs, there were bread queues in Russia, people were queuing up to get food because there wasn't any. A third of America's output went to Russia. And you thought, this is stupid. If they have a war with America, they'll starve if they win. You know, it's just unbelievable. It's why I think we had a national plan, because if the Russians wanted to take us out, they would exclude the Americans and just say, we're not going to touch you, and we'd be left on our own. Just like it is now for us with Ukraine. We never trusted them, I don't think. Just to make you feel better, in the 1980s, I was telling you I was in the Territorial Army. I was commanding an infantry unit. We run a big exercise, and we just had to do an assault river crossing. And I'm with my company, and we'd gone over this river, made the other side safe, and we were making an entrance to bring in a pontoon bridge when it was dark. The bridge came in, and the brigade went over the bridge. 4,000 men and vehicles before first light, and we were resting on having a sleep. We were knackered, and it was a time when the Soviets were looking at what we were doing, and we were looking at what they were doing. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, this coach pulled out, and a full-dress Soviet guy let down. So I shot him. We had blanks, but I just spoke with him. He laughed and he came over, and he saw my wings on my uniform, because I was still wearing my pilot's wing in the army. And he said, "Oh, you're a pilot?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What did you fly?" So I said, "Vulcan." And he went, "Vulcan? Ah, I would have liked to have flown against one of those. We really feared the Vulcans." I said, "You're just saying that because I don't know the right." He said, "No, we never effectively worked out a way of getting them." He was quite blasé about it. He said, "The B-52, no problem, but the Vulcan, you know." So it made me feel better at the time. But it was a wonderful aeroplane at its time. And it wouldn't be any good today. It wouldn't have been any good out in Iraq or anything like that, because it was past its time. But for its time, it was the best in the world.
I just thought, obviously, we haven't got a time limit, but I know some people might be going. But I know there's quite a few people that got some questions they'd like to ask you. I don't know if Nat had it. Nat had his hand up for a while. Don't know if that's him wanting to ask a question. Nat, okay, go ahead then, and then we'll start with the other two afterwards. You're on mute at the moment.
Go ahead, Nat.
Mate, I'm coming. Okay, just background to what John was saying. I was on Vulcan 70-76, and during our war study, when we were locked in a vault studying our targets and that, we actually made a decision, because we knew as soon as we got airborne, our bases would be blatted. And our diversions were in Turkey, and they had been blatted as well by Russian missiles. We actually made the decision, after we dropped our weapon, we would stay at low level. Although our orders told us to climb, we decided to stay at low level till we nearly ran out of fuel, bail out, and then all meet up on the ground and survive.
Wow.
Never occurred to us, to be honest, to do that. Really never. We just said we'd fly. We said, I mean, where the hell would you go in Russia? When they found you, they were going to probably eat you, I think, because they'd be out of food, you know?
Well, it's a big country, so one would obviously do evasion, but who knows what would happen. Just thank goodness we never had to do it. Okay, that's
Yes.
The American guy came up with it. He called it MAD, mutually assured destruction. But you know, the code name, it was still the code name when you had it, but the Armageddon was the operation name, and it would have been. I mean, Waddington would have ceased to exist the second the last aircraft left. We were worried more about trying to get away off the base than we were about the other end. Because if somebody didn't make their mind up quickly, bomber command to launch us, you've got 4 minutes. So the time they take up making a decision, then the thing says scramble, okay? Then you've got to authenticate the scramble. It had to come across in the right format with the code word. So You got that, the navigator would say to you, right, it's correct, Captain, you'd let the brakes off and go. Now, in a war simulator, you could go at 15-minute intervals. So the first one went, 15 seconds later, you went, sorry, seconds, not minutes. And then the third and the fourth. Now, the fourth guy, depending on how long the decisions take, is going to be pretty close to the bank. You've got to get at least 7 miles away. One of the things we've got there, Waddington, is a blast map of Waddington. You needed to be quite a way away, almost to Newark, before you were going to escape the blast, and you had to get high. 7,000 feet was the minimum. If any of you want to see the effects of movement, if you go on the Nuke Map by Alex Wellstein, he's quite good. You can put a target in anywhere, you can put any size of bomb you want, and it will show you the effect it would have on the area. And I say our own particular bomb, the W177 that Nat and I carried, it blew a hole in the ground about 0.9 of a kilometre across and 300 feet deep. The point of using the V-force at all is we could drop it accurately. At low level, you're talking about feet as an error, whereas with a nuclear missile, I think at the time, the intercontinental ones were lucky to be within 5 kilometres because there was no GPS guidance. So Blue Steel itself was within about 700 yards, but Blue Steel had a 1 megaton warhead on it. But by the time they got low level, they could only go launch it about 50, 100 miles from the target, whereas before it had been designed to go much further. And it was, oh gosh, 7 hours was fine. I mean, you see the nose on it, look, that would come off. There's a radar in there for its height behind it that judges the height it's going at. To get it to launch at all, it was in a carrier, like a bomb tray over it. And the switch you see in the Vulcan on the left-hand side by the captain, and there, you had to make that, the ports in this thing to turn, so the explosive that was in the carrier threw the weapon down. The big problem you had with the Vulcans for any aircraft is once you're traveling at the speeds that we did, the aerofoil shape of the bomb would make it fly in the bomb bay. We actually had a 1,000-pounder do that. You closed the bomb doors and it was trapped between the bomb doors. But this would be the same. You had to get something that would push it down. And it used to push it down, and then parachutes would come out the back and drag it back from the aircraft. There was a sensor in the front that how fast you were going, so that it was safe. And as I say, on the other side is a control panel that you'd set the various things. We used to set it for ground burst, 30-second timing, and with parachute deployment. They were white to start with, and then they painted them green, I think. The practice ones were blue, if you ever see one of those. But they thought it was a bit silly having a camouflage aircraft dropping a weapon that you could see from miles away, in case anybody took a tractor at it. Beautifully made. I mean, the work on it was superb, engineering work. But it just didn't feel what it was. When we went to Wittering to do the nuclear weapons course, they used to put like an ashtray on the in front of you. You think, that's a funny ashtray. That was actually a depleted warhead from one of the early nuclear weapons. And you seem to imagine these great big bombs. The warhead inside it must be huge. Well, it isn't. Uranium and plutonium are extremely heavy and dense. I think Hiroshima bomb had about 16 kilos of nuclear material in it. The rest of it is all wrapped around it. Because the problem you've got is you don't want to drop it on the tarmac from an aircraft like you see sometimes in the war and have a nuclear weapon go off. So it has to have so much safety in it. The earlier ones, I think like Blue Daniel, used to pack the area between the explosive and the core itself with ball bearings, 2,000 ball bearings, which had to be emptied out before you took off, and you had to last minute load the core itself through into the bomb before you went. Unbelievable. Anyway, there you go. Sorry about that. Go on, Nat. So you're going to be walking around somewhere between Turkey and Ukraine and hoping to find somebody friendly enough to take you in.
I'd take him in.
Good. Okay, we've got two people now that want to ask questions. First off, we'll start off with Richard.
Brilliant, John. Thanks ever so much for all your anecdotes. Really, real pleasure to listen to you. Thank you.
Not for 30 years or 60 years.
Did you happen to know Tony Davis by any chance? Ended up as a wing commander. He was on the Vulcan force, probably about your age.
I don't remember his name. I'm sorry, mate.
No, not to worry, not to worry. Another colleague of mine, he used to be on on Nimrods and Shackletons, and he did a westabout as well. And he said it was very enjoyable going that direction. What was your favourite stop-off point on your westabout?
It's strange, really. Gan, I used to love Gan, because you could walk off the pan to it was like a tropical island, and there were fruit bats hanging from the trees, and you would take a coconut, take the eye out, put some Bacardi in, and you had what they've got the modern day things. You can buy the white Bacardi, can't you? We used to do that and then sit on the beach and drink it out the coconut. That was very nice. But my favourite place of all is Goose. I love Goose. The hangar there that was the Air Force RAF side burnt down this back end. So there's nothing there at all. And I think after the early 70s, they operated out the American side of the base anyway. You were on your own, you see. The thing is that people don't realise, you say you're in a squadron, you might as well have not been in a squadron. I never operated with another Vulcan anywhere else. Even if you got deployed at the Far East, you just flew in missions. It wasn't sending two Vulcans together, but always on your own. So you had to learn to be self-reliant. And if you landed somewhere and you're in trouble, you either had to wait for stuff to come to you or fix it yourself. There's an aircraft going around the Hong Kong low level, and there's the checkerboard, give you some idea what it's like.
Any more questions? There was a few other people that had questions.
Yeah, we've got Graham.
Go on, Graham. Go ahead, mate.
Yeah, hi, John. Thanks very much for all the info and the fascinating anecdotes. Yeah, I've got some questions actually. So just quickly, first, quite an easy one, I think. I used to live in Kettering, in the north end of Kettering, and we were obviously on a low. I think it was during the bombing competitions you must have had. It would have been about 1970. And we used to get Vulcans and B-52s, and I'm pretty sure there were others. The F-111s weren't here yet, and they weren't really strategic bombers. But did you take part in any of those? Because it was pretty low. I mean, I lived in a house where you'd see B-52 followed by a Vulcan coming over, and I don't think you were 200 feet high. I think it was quite a bit less than that. I mean,
it didn't fly as low as us, and they had what was both sides used to cheat, you see.
Well, I think there was cheating going on in those competitions. I don't. Did you fly in any of them?
Yes,
It would have been
we flew Bomber Command 1 every year.
Yeah, so over Northamptonshire.
It depends. I know they picked all sorts of routes. I mean, mainly there was a route that went around the whole of the UK that had been pre-selected, and we had map books made for it and everything, and a different entry point. One of the things was you went in either off the Devon coast or off the north coast of Scotland or off the west coast of Scotland, but you followed a predetermined route. That was to keep it safe and away from. I mean, as far as going over towns were going, flight safety was that you're not supposed to go below 2,000 feet over a town, because I mean, if the thing starts to fall apart, it's going to be a bit dangerous for the people in it.
They were. I mean, it was a town. I can promise you, I lived in it, and they weren't at 2,000 feet.
No,
The Vulcans and the B-52s were both much lower than that. I would say they weren't 500 either. You could see the aircraft and I was a big time aircraft spotter at the time. It wasn't like I was just casually walking up the street.
the
We
word
lived we
terribly.
lived under the approach for RAF Falconbury, and so they had RF-4C Phantoms, so the reconnaissance Phantoms there, and we would get them over time. That we were on the very end of the start of their approach on finals going into Falconbury at Huntingdon, and anyway, so yeah, so you were flying those competitions, were you?
Yes, I never wanted to go into the American one because it meant flying the way the Americans did, at totally different heights, totally different things. I mean, a good friend of mine actually won the competition one year, but Pete Perry won the general trophies, but Paddy Langdown won the navigation one, and that was solely because they did Astro and stuff like that manually and had done it for years. They came in with an incredible score at the end of the nav things. I mean, you imagine 1,000 miles on Astro, and they were within, I think, 150 yards.
Oh, I can't imagine that, honestly, John. I've heard of it, and that's about as far as I'm going to go with astro navigation.
Well,
But
the thing about Astro, I mean, this is when I first went on them, is that we're doing 8 miles a minute when you're at high level. So if your watch is out by 30 seconds, you're automatically 4 miles out before you start.
wow, yeah,
And
yeah.
because your reading's out of the book that tells you what the star you're looking at should be on this sort of bearing, you're going to plot it, but you're going to be out because your time's wrong. We didn't have a watch that was accurate enough. We used to tune into the nuclear clock to get a time on that. But when we went out the Far East, we always used to buy a Seiko chronograph. They were about a tenner in those days. But then you had an accurate watch instead of the Air Force Hamilton, I think they were at the time. And your navigation improved immeasurably, simply because you had a good time.
So I've got more questions, to be honest. So just let me understand this. So Flying Dales had a warning. I've seen the dome and all that, and yeah, I get it, and I understand a bit about how NORAD worked. Not much, but enough to get it that they saw a launch from the Soviet Union or somewhere, and then they saw it coming in. So you had, I mean, we all knew about the 4 minute thing. Not maybe a lot of these youngsters out there don't remember this 4 minute thing, but we grew up with that. The COVID thing was bad for the kids, but I tell you what, we grew up, and you were a bit older than me, but not much. We grew up with this 4 minute thing hanging over us the whole of our lives. I remember my dad listening to the radio when the Cuban crisis was on. We were living 20 miles from Cottesmore. I think Cottesmore was quite a target. I remember going up the A1 and seeing the our surface to air missiles in that site. I can't remember the name of it. On the right, as you went north on the A1, there was a whole field of surface to air missiles.
Yeah, there
which
was more that they had in those days.
Yeah, well, yeah. No, these were our SAMs to hit the Russian bombers coming in.
Well, they had to protect our bases. The Lightnings were there solely to defend against the incoming Russian bombers that were into our airfield, right? That's why they could climb so quick, because
Absolutely.
Glider and stuff like that was supersonic. So by the time they saw those, these guys had to get off the ground, I think they could get to 40,000 feet in less than 4 minutes. They'd loose the missiles off and come back down. Their air time, they could only manage about 20 minutes they were up. So it was straight up, loose the missiles, probably get 2 bombers and ram the third.
So how did the 4 minute thing work? Because you were on QRA, you had 4 Vulcans sitting there waiting to take off. You had 15 minutes readiness, as I understood you say, but you only had 4 minutes warning. So how do you get a Vulcan airborne in 4 minutes when you've got 15 minutes readiness?
Well, you're only technically given 15 minutes readiness. I mean, the thing that would have got us is somebody just saying right now, right, bomb Britain. There would always a degree of build-up to a situation like that.
Oh, right, okay.
Right. Now, what we did then was, because you could only get so many aircraft airborne in 4 minutes, we dispersed the whole lot across the whole of Britain. So there were 15 or 16 sites which would have 3 Vulcans on each one, or 4. Some only had 2. We used to do regular flights. And I had Machrihanish as one of my dispersals, Wattisham, Marham even. And then through the year, what would happen is you'd take off, land there, and you'd scramble from whatever the base was to give them the practice of doing it. That's why we had to be able to service ourselves. Because if you got there and you didn't have the ground crew hadn't arrived, you had to refuel yourself, check all the airs and stuff like that.